Alrighty, my friends, welcome back to our final installment of the videos for this week. So in the previous videos, we looked at bony fish and deep sea fish and several different types of marine mammals out there. Of course, there's way more than what we have time to dive into, but I wanted to have one separate video for our lovely creatures called the whale. Very, very, very fascinating species, and there's lots of different species as well, but the whole order itself of Cetiosa are really, really absolutely fantastic creatures. So today we're going to learn some of the differences between various animals or various types of whales, and dive into this idea of commercial whaling and ways that we can protect whales and how just incredibly important they are for our oceans. So let's dive into it. May as well. Okay, so our lovely species or lovely order of Cetiosa. So something that's really important to talk about with whales is the fact that dolphins are indeed in this category. So all dolphins are whales, but not whales are dolphins, if that makes sense, right? So this bottlenose dolphin here is considered a whale, but this humpback whale here is not considered a dolphin, if that makes sense. And the top photo here, this is a drone footage of a blue whale, which is the largest of all the whale species. And this is a North Right Pacific whale. And these animals here are extremely endangered. They unfortunately are not doing very well in the Atlantic. They're doing okay in the Pacific, but the Atlantic, they are really, frankly, not doing very well at all. So of the overall order of Cetiosa, there are, at the time of this recording, 79 living species of Cetiosa. They actually evolved from something much like a sheep or a horse. And they, horse-like animals that spent increasing amounts of time in shallow waters searching for food. So what's really fascinating, I think, with whales is we believe that they, everything started in the oceans, right? Life began in the water, and then eventually, after the ozone layer was established in the stratosphere to help protect from harmful UV radiation, they evolved to come onto land, and they came onto land for a while, and then they're like, I don't like that, and they went back into the water. Then they came back on land, went back in the water, came back in land. So they kind of flip-flopped several times throughout their iteration and evolution as an order. So kind of really fascinating, I think, to consider that. Their forelimbs are actually used for steering. And their vestigial hind limbs are actually not visible outside of the body. So they actually have bones, if you will, that exist within their body that we can't see, that help them with their movement. They're very, very streamlined. They can move very, very efficiently through the water without using as much energy, which makes sense, especially for the bigger whales like the blue whale. That's a lot of body, a lot of weight to move around, and they can do so pretty seamlessly. They are very much adapted for diving. They take 1 to 3 breaths per minute, whereas humans, we take about 15 breaths per minute, right? So they breathe pretty slowly. What's also really fascinating about this is they can extract about 90% of oxygen with each breath, whereas humans, we only extract about 4 to 20% of oxygen when we breathe, which is really fascinating. They also have collapsible lungs and rib cages. And this makes sense, right? So if we think about sperm whales, for example, they dive deep down into incredible depths. And we know that air is compressible. So as they go further and further down, their lungs compress and shrink in size just because of all of that pressure. And so their rib cages also have to collapse as well. So everyone's kind of moving things along here, which is quite fascinating. So with whales, we have kind of 2 categories of whales. We have toothed whales, which include dolphins, killer whales, beluga whales, etc. And then we have our baleen whales. So when we are considering toothed whales, they have a jaw with lines of teeth, as you would expect. What's fascinating with orca is different species type of orca have different wear on their teeth. So if you have an orca that eats harder things like lobsters, crabs, anything with like a really hard shell, they find that their teeth are actually worn down a bit more than killer whales who eat mostly things like, like seals or whales, which are more blubbery, right? So really fascinating, I think, to consider that. So I encourage you, if you have the time or would like to, you can dive further into that idea and investigate the different jaw structure and bone structure of their teeth. Different species of killer whale. Whereas baleen whales, so baleen is this plate, like this kind of like upper mouth plate that has basically, for all intents and purposes, fur that extends downward, like really, really tightly packed together fur, so that they use that as a filter. So baleen whales take big old gulps of water and go, and then they spew out the water, and anything that's left in their mouth is what they eat. So anything that's not able to pass through the baleen is then eaten. And this is what kind of a lunge feeding can look like. What's also really fascinating is we've observed that like humpback whales, they can sometimes hunt together, and they do this really cool thing, and some dolphins actually do this too, where they go kind of under the water a bit and they blow bubbles, like a circular row of bubbles, to kind of force small fish and krill up to the surface, where then several whales can then all take big old gulps together. So it's a way that we've been able to see that they work together and hunt together. They're not just an individual species, so it's an individual hunter. They have other hunting styles as well, but I think this one's really, really quite fascinating. You can also refer back to, of course, many bajillion times that I've made this reference, but thinking back to Finding Nemo, right? Near the end, spoiler alert, when they get swallowed by the whale, well, not swallowed, but like brought into that whale's mouth, they're not able to make it out of it because the whale is like, oh, hey, I'm taking you to Australia, free ride. Marlin's trying to like get through the baleen, but can't. So it's kind of a way to think about that and that process. And so we talked about this earlier when we talked about trophic levels and stuff, but I wanted to just highlight here again the size differences between baleen whales and toothed whales, and why baleen whales tend to grow so much larger than toothed whales. And that's what this graphic here on the right is attempting to show, with length on the x-axis, and then just different types of whales and sketches here. So the blue whales obviously are the largest of all of our baleen whale friends. I think this sketch kind of is really interesting in that it makes the whales look really fat. So it cracks me up a little bit. But then our friends over here on the bottom right are our toothed whales, and you can very easily see the differences between the two. Our toothed whales are much smaller. They hunt for things that are lower efficiency, so they just can't grow as big. Also, our baleen whales eat a ton, which we'll talk about and refresh here in just a sec. Next thing that I want to mention is how they communicate. So toothed whales will generally do things like clicking as opposed to singing. And so how they do that is they actually take in sound through their blowhole, and they have almost like an indented skull. And so they will reflect that sound from their blowhole off of their skull and concentrate it through their melon. And then the sound exits through their head. A way that you can kind of think about this, if you've done any sort of singing or humming ever before, and if you can hum kind of up in your nose, like, and it vibrates like your nose area. So you can kind of think of that in a sense as how they can communicate. So they not only do this to talk to each other, but they also do it to echolocate. So it's a form of hunting. This graphic here is from your book, but just kind of again showing how they take in the sound through their blowhole, refract it or reflect it off of their skull through their melon, and then the clicks go out. How fast the clicks come back to them will identify to them how far away their target is, which is really quite neat, I think. And if you recall from the very beginning of the semester, I think I shared a video of sperm whales and how loud their clicks can be. They also use clicking to communicate, but also to echolocate, especially in the deep oceans when they are hunting for their friends, the giant squid. And their clicks can be loud enough to stop a human heart or even paralyze humans in their midst. And then I also have a picture here of a beluga whale. They are actually the most vocal of all the whales. And they are also a toothed whale, but just like, look at that melon, right? And it's really, I've seen videos of like someone going up to a beluga whale and just kind of like shaking their little melon. It's very squishy looking and supposedly doesn't hurt them, but just gives me a bit of a giggle. So if you want something to make you smile a little bit, then you can look into those videos as well. Kind of cool. So much like some of our other friends in the oceans, we have high or very large migration patterns for a lot of different types of whale. So these pictures here are looking at the migration paths and seasonal distribution of 5 different types of whale. So we can see here that our gray whales and our humpback whales tend to travel extremely long distances between cold water feeding areas and warm water calving and mating areas. So oftentimes you can see these patterns here in the Bay Area and like down in the Monterey region. You can actually, like, this is primo time for whale watching because gray whales and humpback whales are both migrating right now. And so they are migrating up to the polar seas where, again, if you remember from when we talked about the primary productivity in the oceans and which ocean and when, or which section of ocean is the most productive, and we recognize that the polar oceans are most productive, especially in the summertime when they have the most direct sunlight and they have abundant nutrients. So whales take this into account and go to these regions. There are, however, some whales that actually don't move around too much. They move over much shorter distances and stay in cooler waters. So the bowhead, beluga, and narwhal. Yes, narwhals are included in whales. They are like the unicorns of the oceans, but they are actually alive. But they do have indeed one horn, and so that's why they're generally named the unicorn of the oceans. So a way that you will likely see this idea in an assessment on the final is you're going to have to match the whale migration pattern with the map here. So just make sure that you keep this in mind. Of course, we must go into this idea of how important whales are to the oceans. This is something called the whale pump. So they play a huge role in storing carbon in the oceans. They eat a lot of phytoplankton and krill eat phytoplankton, right? So they take in, and phytoplankton, are photosynthesizing, so they're taking in CO2, giving us oxygen. Whales eat the phytoplankton, and in turn they poop, and the poop is a way to generate nutrients in the oceans, and so that allows for more plankton to bloom. And then, of course, the poop will eventually sink, and that can help store carbon in the deep depths of the oceans in the sediment after a very long time of it taking to sink and be used up by various creatures on the way down. So it's kind of a really neat little circle and cycle near the surface. And then, of course, when whales die, as long as they die in the oceans, they are then, a whale fall is a big thing here, right? So that allows for hundreds to questionably thousands of different animals feasting on that dead whale throughout several years, likely. And last thing we must mention when we're talking about whales, we have to mention commercial whaling. So whaling has been something that's occurred for a very, very, very long time. And this makes sense, right? They are a very large animal. They are an excellent source of meat and oil for, at the time, indigenous communities. And that you need that, right? You want your village to, stay alive. So they would, hunt whales. But it was way more sustainable. Sustainable meaning you're not taking as many resources as they're replenishing, right? But humans got more efficient. We evolved, and now instead of hunting whales with one spear, we're hunting whales with large, massive ships. And we have hunted most species of whale to near extinction. And one scientist started to recognize this. The International Whaling Commission was then created to try and set regulations for whaling to help populations recover. Then in the 1970s, in 1972, we had the Marine Mammal Protection Act, where no marine mammal product can be taken or imported. This is just for the United States, though, and I believe that some other countries and regions have something similar in place, but not everywhere. And there was an amendment in 1994, which then allowed for Native peoples to hunt mammals, scientific research, and bycatch. Bycatch is simply when an animal that is not the target to be hunted for gets caught up in things like fishing nets. And of course, whales need to breathe. And so when they get tangled up in these massive nets, they can't return to the surface to breathe. And so often they die. And it's just like another negative impact of the industrial fishing industry. So not great, not fantastic, right? And then scientific research, I'm still questionable on that. But Native peoples to be able to hunt mammals like in Alaska, for example, that makes sense. Native peoples tend to be way more in tune with the environment and don't take this to their advantage, basically. So could go on and on and on about whales, of course, but we just simply don't have the time. So kind of a neat thing to dive further into, and I encourage you to do so. They are an amazing and very key part of the oceans, and we need to protect them as much as we can. So what's your favorite whale? Tell me all about it. Let's have a greater conversation with whales when we return back in the classroom. So as usual, thank you so much for your time and attention, and I hope you have a delightful rest of your day.